Hello, everyone. This is Empowering Democracy, a series about changes following a likely Russian victory in the Ukraine, a victory which more and more of us see as fairly imminent. Um, Scott Ritter has said time and time again that he expects the victory to occur this summer, and we are getting closer and closer to this summer. And it looks like, from the viewpoint, of Ukraine, that they have one last throw to make. The expectation is that they may have 35 to 40,000 troops to engage in a counterattack, and they will be facing, in one way or another, hundreds of thousands of Russian troops that will be opposing them. Likely they'll be going into a meat grinder. So let's assume, and we are assuming here, that a Russian victory in Ukraine, is likely. And in this series, we've been discussing really a variety of possible effects and possible things that might happen. At the end of our last program, last Tuesday, part 6, we started on the theme of how quickly is the collective West likely to disintegrate once such a victory is attained by Russia. And in this hour, we want to talk about the many aspects involved here. But I want to start by wishing a happy birthday to Matt Waldie, who will be leaving us. Who will be leaving us at 7 p.m. Pacific time, promptly, because his family is eagerly awaiting to take him out to a celebration. So with that, let's start the discussion. Oh, I must add that not only is Matt joining us, but Dee Pierce, the host of the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends.
Yes, change in name.
Change in name has joined us for tonight.
Yes, I'm happy to be here.
Okay, thank you, Dee.
Thank you.
And I am happy to have you, and of course, happy to have you as well, Matt. So, who would like to start us off? With our guesses about how rapidly this is going to happen.
I think that Ukraine may or may not have one more in them, like you were saying. It's kind of, they keep throwing people into Bakhmut, and it seems that they just keep the door a little bit open to make the Ukrainians think that they still need to hold the city, or that they, need to go in and get the troops that they've already placed in there out. For whatever reason, and I'm not sure, understand the military, because I'm not a military person, why Ukraine hasn't completely abandoned Bakhmut at over a month ago. I'm not exactly sure what the goal is. It seems to be that it's like playing right into Russia's hands, and they can just sit there and wait. So you got to think, well, if they're, are they that stupid? I mean, I can't believe they are, right? So there has to be some reason why they have not retreated from the location, other than maybe that the losses are going to be so great from the offensive that it would demoralize the population to the point where they would no longer accept their leadership in Ukraine. And so they have to do something to retain the area, or they lose too much. A whole bunch of people died for nothing. So that's the only thing that I can think of that would make it any reason for them to continually, because it looked like they were going to start an offensive last week. And I know the weather was bad, but it did look like they were going to go forward with it. And instead, they allocated more people to Bakhmut. So I really think that this is either a make or break moment, and they've already broken. And I don't know if they can back off of Artemovsk. It's going to be called soon, or kind of already is, Bakhmut, because otherwise they have relinquished what some people are saying could be upwards of 35 to 40,000 people in just in the Battle of Bakhmut over the last 6 months. And there's another 50, up to 12 to 15 that may still be in the region, that may be encircled or really already are. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out. If they don't do a spring offensive, they could actually literally drag this out, and Russia could just sit there and relinquish their military to nothing over the next 6 months. If they do decide an offensive, I think that it's either going to make or break the whole thing, which is going to give them another year if they can have some breakthrough going towards Melitopol in the south through Zaporizhia, or if they actually stop and turn around the Russians from Artemovsk and Bakhmut itself and recapture the Krasnohora and that area to the north. I just don't see how that's going to happen. But those could elongate the war up to a year. Otherwise, I think it's a.
But it's really so unlikely, because the Russians now have command of the air.
Complete, yeah, and so much so that they're dropping these guided, glide bombs. That yes, they're a little ways away, but in any kind of normal situation, the air defense would be able to spot them, and either send jets out or shoot them down with S-300s or other rockets, and they're not able to do it. And they're carrying these massive bombs now. They're just glide down and are guided right to their prospective location. And they're not able to just do that in that area. They're able to do that near Kiev. It's everywhere in Ukraine. They have very little or none that I can see. So that makes me feel like Russia is just waiting for them to attack, do their spring offensive, and their superior air and everything else will just decimate them at that point. I'm just saying, if they were able to do those two things, if they one of those two things, if they were to have a successful offensive, and they were able to turn the Russians around in the Bakhmut region, those would be elongating still the inevitable end where Russia wins, and they have to come up with some kind of treaty. But no, I personally think that it's the way it looks, I don't even think they're going to do a second offensive. I think they are going. The offensive is now going into Bakhmut, and they talk about the surrounding areas, Krasnohora, and in the south going from Chasiv up and around to try and loop them around like this. And they are amassing.
So you think their counteroffensive is now occurring? And it's
I have a feeling
on taking back the Bakhmut area.
Yep.
But as we understand it, they are outnumbered there by the Russians.
Personally,
they don't have command of the skies.
Nope.
And the Russians have had a long time to fortify their defenses there.
Well, that's the problem with the south too.
Yeah, there are 3 lines of defense but for the Ukrainians to get through.
Yep.
And most military observers think that it's impossible for them to do so. And as I say, especially now with command of the air, I think the Ukrainian troops will be cut to ribbons.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's my assumption as well. But that's all they have is they have to do one of those two things in order to elongate this war for a few extra months. That's not going to win it. And you know, it's not. It's just going to delay the inevitable a little bit longer and waste more lives. And I can't see any other point to it at all. And I honestly just think that it's Zelensky trying to save his life at this point, that he's pumping these into Bakhmut, because I think once the word comes out of how devastating a loss this is, I don't think they'll have any trust in their leadership anymore. They've held on to that through their propaganda machine pretty well.
Okay, I think we're agreed that there's going to be a likely Russian victory there in Ukraine.
Yep.
So the assumption is there is going to be that victory. And then the question is, what will be the impact on the collective West? And more specifically, how likely is it that the collective West is going to rapidly disintegrate under pressure of the loss? Specifically, why would I think that way? This will be a defeat for NATO. It will be a defeat for Ukraine. It will be a defeat for the United States, but it will be a defeat for NATO, a very big defeat. After this defeat, which has cost NATO most of its armaments, what will it do for the future? Why should the nations of NATO stay together? What is in it for them in this alliance? Now, the Russians are not going to threaten them.
No.
The Russians will be happy with what they do to Ukraine and the settlement that they enforce on this war. They're going to turn to building their own country in collaboration with the Chinese through the Belt, and Road Initiative. So there won't be a threat coming from the east towards the West European nations.
But that's what they have to do, right? That they have to prove that Russia is an imperial army that's hell-bent on taking over Europe, like Nazi Germany. That's been the whole point of bringing those two things up consistently in the EU and the propaganda that we see in the West. There's no evidence of that.
Well, certainly at one time, when we were dealing with the Soviet Union, there was evidence that the Soviet Union wanted to take over the whole of Europe because the Soviet Union was ideologically driven by Stalin.
I don't think they were imperialist. I think that they were controlling the land around them to protect themselves from NATO. NATO came first.
Yes, NATO came first, but it also came in response to the takeover of the East European countries by the Russians. Okay, if you recall the sequence, the fall of Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, takeover by the communist parties in that time.
That was a Communist Party takeover, though. I mean, yes, I agree that the Russia sponsored that Communist Party, but that just because they went and decided to take on a very successful ideology or the very successful economic stance that Russia had, or at the time USSR had, I don't necessarily completely buy that it was a Russian or USSR takeover. I don't think of it as imperialism. There is some colonialism, especially in the West.
Well, I'm not saying that it was imperialism in that sense, that the Russians intended to exploit Europe. Okay, I'm saying that they were not the Russians, but the USSR. Okay, was ideologically driven. Okay, at that time, they did have an ideological vision, and it did include the internationalist element. Okay, of communism. My point is whether that was entirely true or not. It's not the situation now.
Oh no, yeah, no, I understand it, uh, but that's what they're envisioning. They're trying to conjure up that
Yeah, they're
specific,
trying to conjure that up again, but
yeah.
very
And I'm saying
difficult.
that actually didn't exist then either. That was our point of view of it, and that's the only reason why I push back on that notion, because that's what they're trying to elicit right now, is this notion that they're the Soviet Union and that everybody should be a communist country again.
Yeah, well, we realize that they're not, and we realize they're not a communist country, and that they don't have the ideological drive to pass their vision. What they're intent on doing, is creating a nation that is good for their people to live in and to develop their own culture.
Yep.
I don't think it will be possible for Western propaganda to make the Europeans believe that there's a threat that will be coming from the East.
I agree.
Especially when, after the war is over, the Russians start pushing gas through the Turkish pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, and making natural gas available again to the West European countries so they can do well and they can be prosperous.
Yeah. You know what? And I think the pressure from countries like Hungary and Czechoslovakia, who are going to reap the rewards of after this from the Belt and Road Initiative and running Russian gas, which is going to be, taken up like a bad drug habit in the EU within months of the end of any settlement whatsoever. No matter how much the U.S. pushes sanctions, they'll just find another way of delivering it. And so I suspect they will just use a third party in Turkey to, sell it in a different, different denomination, and then put it all into bricks. So
a lot of this gas will again be flowing to Germany.
Has to. That's the thing.
Yes. Begin to do very, very well again.
Yep.
And the politicians and the people of Germany are going to be very happy again, and not seeing any threat. They're going to stick with NATO. I mean,
NATO's dead. I think it's already dead, and I think they already know that. What isn't is the relationship between the United States and the EU, which that is going to get rocked, and I think that's the biggest motivation for the U.S. continuing to fight this war, is to slow down that separation from Europe from the West, because there isn't an inevitability there yet. There are some blocks, and they can continue their lives with just having decent trade relations and then still maintaining their ties with the United States, and keeping this West
What kinds of ties do you mean, though?
Well, just trade ties, opening back up slowly the trade relations.
If the trade ties are there, which I think they will be also, the Europeans will be happy to have trade ties with the United States, mm-hmm. and trade ties with the Belt and Road Initiative and Russia and China. They'll be benefiting from all of these trade ties, but why would they maintain the military ties, with NATO when there's no threat from Russia?
I don't think they will. I don't think sanctions, I don't think NATO will, but I do think that sanctions are going to put a big block, because the United States is still hell-bent on using them at every turn, because they don't want to be able to go to war, and they're becoming more and more reflective on our economy, and very effective towards the EU, disaffective towards the EU. That, but the leaderships are so tied together. So the fall of NATO will almost be an influx of trade relations for a little while. I think that gives the United States a little time to go back and lick its wounds, which is what I fear. I actually don't want them to have the time to lick their wounds, because they're going to go back and try and figure out how to maintain, because the oligarchy will want to maintain control. They'll figure out how they can get their profit margins up high enough from more and more domestic production that they're going to have to push by probably making the United States government pay more and more out, which MMT has no problem with that. But the exploitation eventually has to start again. That's the only way capitalism can maintain itself. And it's gotten to this point where at the fall of Ukraine, the disrepute we have for the people that are in power right now will probably be focused on Biden and his administration. I think that Democrats are going to have a hard time keeping any chamber of government if Russia does what it looks like it's going to do, and all the facts start to come out from Bush and the propaganda war that the Republicans will see as an opportunity to take hold of power. I honestly believe they will start to reveal, and because they're going to want the members of their parties who supported this propaganda war to be removed from office, so that they can put in new people that they think are more trustworthy or more militant or more authoritarian, to push a much harsher government on the United States. I'm hoping that the EU instantly drops away and decides, yes, China is the right for us. That will stop that, because then our economy will be the point where we actually have to get along with China, because the Republicans are pushing heavy for war with China.
So let me see if I understand what you're saying.
Sorry.
You're saying the fall of NATO is likely to come after the repairing of the economic relations of Europe with Russia, okay, and China.
Yep. And they'll bring those armies in-house.
Pairing of these economic relations that will cause the Europeans to see no threat from the East.
Yep.
And to want to allow NATO to fall.
Because they'll want to bring those armies in-house. They'll see the threats coming mostly from other countries, not from Russia, the East. They'll see it in, they'll try and see it in the West. That's what the West wants, is to see the China as the problem. But I don't see that coming to fruition. I
don't see that.
The U.S. is in a really rock and a hard place right now, and I know that they're feeling that. That's my worry, is that they'll double down like they always do, ruin the reputation completely of our government processes, which is really all it takes for the government to fall. Because nobody will believe that the elections are real, especially if a Democrat beats a Republican in certain races. The election in 2024, if this is so if Ukraine falls within the next 3 or 4 months, there may be time for the United States to come back, lick its wounds, and maintain its integrity. Try and spin it so it wasn't a loss.
To maintain its integrity here.
Here, domestically. There's no doubt about it, especially since the Republicans will want to use a lot of the propagandized, the hidden stuff that we've all seen on Telegram, that has been relatively proven and come out through different sources, some of which have been very proven. Those things are still, by and large, pretty well hidden in the United States. They don't really know. And the political motivation to reveal that will be too great for a lot of the Republican candidates.
Okay. Speak of the things that you think are hidden.
I think Busha is still considered a crime that Russia committed. I think that, and from the evidence that I see, I don't believe that's the case. There are certainly atrocities on both sides, and I'm not saying that the Russians were sweet and innocent, but this one was largely staged, and it was staged because it was of the convenience as the army left, that Russia left. The collaborators in that town were rounded up and killed.
Bucha.
Yeah, Busha.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were rounded up and killed, and then framed to look like it was, a retreat attack.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that.
And that's a big deal, because that's still being used by and large by a lot of people to say how bad Russia is, and to prove that they are hell bent on imperialism and going to try and rule over.
So you think the Russian, the Republican candidates will not be able to resist revealing the truth about Busha,
yeah,
and other areas to the American.
Oh, the Hunter Biden stuff, which it doesn't shock me, and I know people are really upset about this whole thing, but these nepotist type of situations, we've had them in it doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, they've happened for decades, since the beginning, of the United States, pretty much. It's not so I don't think of it as being,
we've seen nepotism in the Trump administration.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Well, nepotism in the Bush administration.
Yes, and horrible things to maintain that. Lots of drug abuse that they've hidden, and lots of crimes that they've covered up. This is just part of that culture in that part of power. And as far as my feeling about Trump, I'm not sure if he's going to run. I think he wants to run, of course. Will he win? My fear of Trump, all I have to do is go and look to see what he did in the 4 years that he was in power, which was a tax break for the rich. People assign and demonize him so much that we forget all the, that yes, he's not going to be a good president. But
he's not going to be a good president. He's going to enrich himself.
Yeah.
He's going to make people really cynical.
Yep.
And when the next president comes along and tries to enrich himself, probably the people will just accept it, because it will have become commonplace.
Yeah.
It's really, really damaging. Now, Trump violated the Constitution from his first day in office.
Well, we're violating the Constitution right now with sanctions. Violate the Constitution. I mean, we aren't allowed to do the world. We should. Those are war crimes. I mean,
we are not allowed to do sanctions because we signed the UN treaty.
Yep. Yeah, but we don't care.
It's the law of the land. We don't care if we violate the law, if we violate the Constitution.
Yeah. So that makes the Constitution to the power set that we have right now absolutely worthless. They don't care. They trot it out to shove people down, and to enact those rules onto them. So I'm not saying that the Constitution is bad. I'm just saying that maybe it's time to think differently about how we constitute our government. Not saying that that's going to happen. Just saying that instead of looking at it as sacrosanct, maybe there's some room in there to work on some things and maybe discuss. But
I think there's some room to work on some things too. But that's another issue.
I just think that this might cause a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, I think it might cause. There's a lot of elements here that can cause a constitutional crisis, especially in reaction to the defeat.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Can see more constitutional crises coming around. I see that, but let's see if we can get a fix on how quickly things are likely to happen in Europe. Of course, the truth will quickly come out after the end, and
Yeah.
widely accepted in Germany and in Europe that it was the U.S. who blew up the pipeline.
Yes.
And that is going to be very destructive to NATO and
Yeah.
will make the oil coming through the Turkish pipeline much more acceptable to people. Of course, it's not only they want the gas and everything else, but they're going to want to piss off the United States.
Yep.
Okay, because of what we did in destroying the other pipeline.
Well,
So
it's really just a matter of, does the EU continue in its current form? I think NATO is, after the end of the Ukraine war, is a year process of dismantling, probably 3 or 4 years of
okay,
fake.
a year process of dismantling NATO,
I think
or
that
a year process of dismantling the EU.
No, the dismantling of NATO is going to take at least a year. It's going to be a systematic, untreaty. They're going to have to go through each, country. They're going to have to go through the process of making it look legal, and they're going to have to do whatever they do with the amount of money, and the bases that are in these countries have to be, retaken over. There's a large process.
Air base, for example.
Yeah.
We're going to have to withdraw from Ramstein Air Base.
There's a lot that has to happen. It's not and the first step will be, when Ukraine falls, is if Germany's total leadership and if their government changes. If we see that their government no longer has the Social Democrats and the Green Party that are in power right now, and I hate to say that because that's the truth, that are and do not fall back into the right sector, which actually it's a hit or go miss right now. I'm not sure if they're going to. It's not really set in stone. The only thing that is set in stone is that the bear box and those kinds does look like they're not gonna hold on to power for much longer.
Yes, I agree. I don't think they're going to hold on to power for much longer either.
Yeah, it's the communists. It's the communists and the socialists in that country that I'm hoping will start to come up, from their, where they used to be, or hiding in the parties is what they used to do, and come out strong, because I don't think that Germany is necessarily a right wing country overall.
But just to put a pin on this, though.
Yeah.
So you're expecting the unraveling to occur within a year?
I would say the beginning of the death. So the first negotiations out of NATO will occur in the first year of.
Or within a year. Okay, and what of the EU itself?
I think the EU, it matters on how fast they can repair the relations with Russian oil. If the war Ukraine goes past this year, next winter they're not going to have. I don't care if it could be 60 degrees the whole winter. They're still going to be without a lot of gas to run most of their infrastructure. They stockpiled, and Russia was happy to let them do it. I'm sure Russia was surprised in some respects that they went ahead and just kept pulling money and paying for it, right? But that little bit of gas that they got off before the United States blew up the pipeline, I think saved them this year. It can't save them next year. So they need to get that infrastructure up, and the longer it takes to get that infrastructure back up and get energy stabilized, the more the EU will seem like a liability, because the countries want to have their sovereignty of being able to spend as much as they need in order to bring their infrastructure up.
Can the EU stay together by changing the basic agreement to allow the individual nations to run the deficits that they need to run?
I would turn that around and say, what about the states doing that? What about if the United States would try that? it would ruin the point of the United States, right? It would no longer be the United States. That's more or less that's the end of the EU. If the EU says, yeah, France, you go ahead and do what you need to do. We're going to back off the money. We're not going to, no debt. We're, all this kind of things. You run your economy for a year, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Well, that year, they're never going to want to give it up after that because they're going to. That's
Oh, I'm not saying that the EU would say to the French, but go and run your economy as you want, but for a year and use the franc. Okay, what I'm saying is the ECB,
no, okay, yeah,
okay, would allow
that would be the only saving grace for the EU.
printing, okay, of money to
Yeah.
get all the European nations through the crisis. In other
Yeah.
words, that the ECB would start acting like a real central bank, okay,
Yep.
and back all its constituent states, to the extent they have to be backed.
Yep.
So my question is, would that save the EU? And if that doesn't happen, if the EU starts to go in the ideological direction again that they've always operated,
Mm-hmm.
uh, would that be the end of the EU? And how long would that take?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that has to happen is Germany's elections, because Germany runs the EU. We have to see how well Germany repairs its economy ahead of time to know that, and there it isn't. I agree with you. The ECB is going to have to take over. They're going to have to run it like a central bank. Is what I mean. They're not going to have to be able to. So a lot of the austerity that they're going to want to instinctively put in to solve these issues that they think they have with demand, right? Because they're going to want to believe that demand is what's going to drive inflation. I don't believe that if they go that route, they can survive. I don't know if
believe that either. So then
Yeah.
the question is, how long will it take for the EU to unravel?
well, I guarantee that, like you said, I guarantee that somebody in there is going to want to stop the gravy train at one point or another when they shouldn't. And at that point, the countries that are used to the gravy train will want to keep the gravy train because this is what's working well for their countries. So I think that the solution will cause the demise of the EU. How long that takes, it really matters on how the how they handle the debt, if the talk of debt. If they don't push the debt too soon, they might be able to get 5 years. If they do push the debt, it could be as little as 2-3 years. If they decide that they're going to just run as a blank check, and not put a date on it, they may save the EU for 20 years. That's
So
the
let
big
me
difference.
ask the following question. There will be a lot of incentives placed in the way of France,
Yeah.
to simply withdraw from the EU in the short run.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why would France then stay in the EU? And by the way, if France decides that it wants to leave the EU and it repudiates the Maastricht Treaty,
Mm-hmm.
what can the EU do about it?
Well, not much other than to turn demand the immediate repayment of their so-called debt. But of course, if they don't, what are they going to use as exchange? And I mean, that automatically shows another feature that will cut the EU's legs underneath of them as well, because you're right. I mean, what are they going to accept as debt relief at that point? They're not going to take francs, right? So
there's a technical problem. Okay, the technical problem is that the IT systems
mhm.
have to move quickly
Yes,
to start to issue the franc and have the franc replace
I
the
understand.
euro,
You're right.
okay, as the currency. Now, the EU previously blocked any move to have that happen in Greece, okay, a few years
Yep.
back, because
Yep.
the Greeks were moving that way,
Yep.
but they could not figure out how to make the transition quickly enough to avoid a severe depression in Greece. Okay, so
Well,
they did it. Okay, I wrote a book about that.
oh well.
Don't you know that book?
I think I do. I haven't read it, so I apologize. I have read it. I really enjoy your feedback loop books, but I know those are a lot older. But those are my favorite. But yeah, but I wonder if the digital money and coinage and that kind of stuff. I mean, Greece really just didn't have any of those backers to come in and set that up in time. It was a different time. I mean, it was what 2010, right? And somewhere in
No,
my range.
it was 2000. I think it was 2000. Okay, I want to say the crisis was in 2015, actually. Okay, at
Should
that
have
time,
been.
because uh,
Got it.
that's the time when Giannis was the finance minister.
Yes. No, you're right. Right. Yeah.
2015.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I
it was then that his party took over,
I think digital currency at
tried
that time.
to get the EU to be flexible
Yeah.
in terms of imposing austerity on Greece. And the people who run the EU, the Troika, were
Yeah.
unwilling to be flexible, and they imposed austerity, okay, on Greece. And Greece could not go back to the drachma fast enough, okay, to prevent that, because the European Central Bank ultimately controlled the IT system of the Greek banks, and were in a position to shut down um, the IT systems and
Mm.
leave the Greeks without any cash, okay, for the economy. So they forced the government, but Syriza, to give in. Okay, there was really no choice.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yes.
Giannis quit. Okay,
But
and
I
his
don't know if digital coinage is quite as hard to ramp up as it may have been. Um, in France, they are a lot more IT oriented. I mean, they are. I'm wondering if there wouldn't be less of a problem this time around.
there might be less of a problem. I think the technology existed in 2015 to make a transition that would have been very, very rapid. But I don't think, in fact, I think I know what the technology was at that time that would have allowed that. But the Greeks did not know enough about the available IT options to put that in place very quickly.
Yeah. Well, I know that what's his name on the Duran, he lives down there and talks about the infrastructure really being slowly built up, you know, that it isn't as robust as the rest of Europe. And it's getting there, but I think they also may have had a problem with being able to handle the infrastructure, because there is some infrastructure with it. It isn't just, you know, you have to be able to handle the volume that the entire system would create, and not collapse and not, you know, fail constantly. Because if it failed once or twice a day, I mean, that's the same thing as your bank closing when you're trying to get money, right? So
Right.
you're not, it would cause panic, and then no way of getting anything, you know.
Right. Okay. So if Macron or his successor would like to pull out of the EU quickly, they might have some severe IT problems. Okay.
Good.
Doing so. Okay. And making the transition back to their older currency. The same for Italy.
Yeah. I wish I knew more about that. That's actually that's a good topic of research. I know that there are more countries set up getting ready for it. I know Mexico is getting ready to do a similar type of digital coin. I know that South America has wanted to create a universal, just South American coin, and that they're ready to go. They just need the treaties to be signed so that they can start to do the cross country commerce that they want to do. That's going to really stabilize South America. I can't think of the name of it, but anyway, it's based in not Bolivia, Ecuador.
If they have a single currency, though, then don't the individual nations lose their sovereign currency?
It isn't set up that way. It's a more like a so somebody in Bolivia who needs to buy something in another part of South America, they can use this coin instead of going through the process of the banks approving the loan in the other country. It's a clearinghouse.
They can use their native currency.
Yes.
To buy the digital coins.
Yes.
And they trade, in the digital coins.
Yep. No, that's what they have.
Like the situation now, where nations that don't have the reserve currency can still trade, in international relations because they just use their domestic currency.
Yep.
To buy the reserve currency.
Yes, and I mean that's what BRICS.
Like and that could work.
Yeah.
In other words, that's not really a problem.
Well, yeah, it's just policy wise, it goes through a different body in order to make any changes. But I don't see any reason why that couldn't be subservient to any government entity. That we misunderstand that relationship between money and corporations and government. Because we believe in this free market having some kind of power over the system that is inherent or intrinsic, when it's all planned.
We're saying, indeed, if you'd like to come in here, I think it would be good. So we're saying we expect that part of the collective West, involving Europe, is likely to unravel fairly fast, probably within 2 or 3 years.
I think the writing moved down the wall then.
And the writing on the wall then within 2 or 3 years. What about the part of the collective West that is in Latin America?
Well, what I find interesting is what Janice Yellen was saying, because with all this that's going on, and the U.S. is losing its hegemonic powers.
Yep, she's the first major financial figure in the United States to admit that sanctions could cause the end of U.S. hegemony.
Right, but she also said that the dollar, that she's not really worried about the dollar remaining a major currency for some time to come. And she was certainly right to warn against the use of the dollar for sanction purposes.
Yes.
She was right about that, wasn't she?
Yep. And they've known this.
Losing power. You can see the is losing its powers on what it liked to do to other countries. And actually, it was the people that were being hurt in the other countries.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that was 99. 151 million people, civilians, were dead in Iraq from our 105 million, something like that. It wasn't that many, 1.5 million were
Yes.
killed by our U.S. sanctions in Iraq by 1999, and that there were reports already by 1999 that the use of sanctions by the United States should be curtailed, or it will cause exactly what we see happening right now, with
Right.
the alternative being necessary to explore outside the dollar, because otherwise countries can't survive.
But don't we already see Latin America as part of the collective West unraveling its ties
Mm-hmm.
with the empire,
Yes, we do.
already loosening its ties even before the end, okay, of the
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine war.
Yes, we're
Uh,
watching it happen.
watching it happen, and the unraveling of those ties involves moving away from the dollar.
Right. So all the countries are becoming empowered.
So if we impose sanctions on those countries to try to hold things together, the sanctions will have the reverse effect and only accelerate the move uh, to another financial system, most probably towards the BRICS.
Yes, more countries are moving to BRICS.
So, how long will it take for us to give in and stop the use of economic sanctions in dealing with other countries? Can
It's
we
like a
make a
basic
yes on
agreement.
that? I mean, it's obviously self-defeating right now. Seems to be self-defeating.
Right, and we have to act like a bully and come up with a bunch of idiotic things. So, you know what I'm saying? It has to be like this little drama. This drama is gonna occur, and the next thing you know, then we'll recognize the changes that are happening. But they've got to come up with some kind of drama first.
So we've been here for 53 minutes. The hour is almost over, and Matt has to
Yeah,
leave. But can we agree to resume this discussion on next Tuesday
yeah, that would be great.
about, the unraveling?
Yeah, that
Uh,
sounds great.
okay, so Matt, I think we're going to let you go now.
Well, I really appreciate it. I had fun. Thank you very much, and talk to you soon.
Okay, happy birthday and have a wonderful celebration tonight.
Thank
Yes,
you.
enjoy your celebration.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Bye. Dee, so you and I think, would you like to say anything more about the unraveling at this point?
Yeah, I find it interesting every week.
Uh,
Every week
yes,
you start
yes.
watching things happening and watching the different players, and it's interesting. And of course, you're not going to see things on our media. You have to be on social media.
Yes, you have to be on social media and you have to be looking at other sources, foreign sources, international sources, or the unraveling won't be covered.
Exactly, and that's what has me is
Not
that people
covered here in the United States.
right. So people are going to be, and I often thought about that is how people are going to react because they don't know anything. A lot of people don't know anything, so shell shock, or I just don't know.
Yeah, we have to think about uh, the impact the surprises are likely to have on the domestic population here. Okay, in other words, what's going on in Latin America with country after country seeking new economic paths is going to impact our business interests down there.
Yes, it is.
And the news of that is going to filter back to this country.
And then
And
our Yeah, our news system, who knows how they're going to present it to the public.
Yes. Yes, but we know that they will try to maintain their profits as much as they can,
Mhm.
and to use propaganda to sell us our mass media propaganda to sell us on what they're doing.
Right.
That is certainly going to happen.
So we really don't know the story they're going to come up with, but they're going to come up with some kind of story.
Yes, they will. I see a bunch of questions, or some questions. Shall we begin to consider those?
Yes.
Okay. Steve says happy birthday, and Steve Wolfbrand. Steve says,
Yeah.
but NATO has no purpose anymore. Okay. After the defeat, okay, in Ukraine, if the Russians then step back and don't do anything that could be interpreted as aggressive after that, uh, okay, then the nations of Europe will probably begin to agree that NATO has no purpose anymore. Okay, unless the U.S. can convince the nations of Europe that it is a legitimate purpose to fight a war with China, I think that's going to be a tall order.
Because I'm sure Europe has had enough. I mean, they're actually living over, they're dealing with it more so than we are.
Yes. Okay, and I think that for many of them it's already enough.
Yes.
But we really need to discuss that more nation by nation, I think, because the East Europeans seem to have different ideas from the West Europeans. Okay, and I think we have to discuss that some. Anyway, Steve Wolfbrandt is saying Finland joining NATO is a big mistake, okay, in my opinion. He also says, I believe Putin asked Clinton to join the EU. Clinton declined, sadly. Yes, that was
That
a
was true.
huge error on the part of the United States. And we did it because we feared economic competition from the Russians in the context of the EU. Steve Wolfbrand says RFK Jr. can beat Trump. He announces tomorrow morning. Sabby, okay, is covering it. Yes, I believe RFK Jr. can be Trump, but the question is, can RFK Jr. beat the establishment?
Hmm. That's the big question.
That's the big question. Or will they simply rig everything against him? And if they do, will he fold in the same way Bernie folded? Steve Wolfbrand says everyone knows who blew up the pipeline. Yes, everyone does know who blew up the pipeline. And that opinion is going to become more and more widespread among the European nations, I think. And I think that's going to be a big factor in the fall of NATO. I mean, how can you have an alliance where the most powerful nation in the alliance is attacking other members? I mean, you can't have that. That can't exist. In fact, okay, I think if NATO wants to survive at all, the best thing it can do is throw the United States out for attacking another nation,
Yes.
for attacking an ally. Okay, but it will never do that. Never do that.
No.
Okay, so folks, we're at 10:02 and only a few people are here. So unless anyone has a very key issue to bring up, I think I'm going to end the broadcast for tonight. I remind you that tomorrow we have another Dump the Corruption fundraising program. For the first time, we're going to shift to the establishment Republicans. In other words, the Republicans within the party who were part of the Republican Party establishment, people like Kevin McCarthy and those who surround him. And we'll do that for a while. And then we may be moving on to the Freedom Caucus, treat them separately from the rest of the Republicans to see if their fundraising pattern, is any different. But we're going to do the first fundraising program on the Republicans tomorrow.
Should be interesting.
And we'll do another on Friday. And don't forget, on Thursday, we have our series on the impact of the end of neoliberalism domestically, because we can see the end of neoliberalism coming. That's even related to the disintegration of the collective West that we're discussing in our Tuesday series. So that's also going to enter our discussion in some way, I'm sure, as the neoliberalism series proceeds. But anyway, that's going to be on Thursday. It's possible that Matt may join us for that. I have to see what he's doing on Thursday and see if he wants to come in. I'll also be trying to get Sherry Wise to join us on Thursday if she is willing. Anyway, everybody, good night for now. And thank you for coming.
And buy Joe a coffee.
And we'll see you tomorrow. Please buy me a coffee. And please visit my Patreon page upon occasion. Again, thank you for coming. And thank you, Dee, for joining us tonight.
Yes, and thank you, Joe, for inviting me. And good night, Steve Wolfbrand. He said good night.
Yeah. Good night, Steve Wolfbrand.